The Pixel 9a is the latest mid-range phone from Google, but depending on your market, you may be able to get the Pixel 8 cheaper than the Pixel 9a. Also, you may want to spend a few bucks more and get the more premium version, which is the Pixel 9. The Pixel 9a does not have a camera bump and has a plastic back, which makes it lighter than the Pixel 9, 12 grams lighter to be exact. But it is IP68 rated with an aluminum frame. The Pixel 9 base model has a shiny glass on the back of the device. It is also IP68 rated, has a higher wireless charging speed, and also supports reverse charging. The Pixel 8 is a little bit smaller than both the Pixel 9 and Pixel 9a. It is similar in weight to the Pixel 9a and is lighter than Pixel 9. The display of all of them goes up to 120Hz, and none of them supports an adaptive refresh rate like the Pixel 9 Pro, which usually saves battery life. That said, they all have bright displays, and particularly the display of the Pixel 9 is the latest Samsung M14 panel, which is one of the best on the market. Not even Samsung's latest flagship has this display. The Pixel 9a and Pixel 8 both have optical fingerprint scanners, which are a bit outdated, while the Pixel 9 has an ultrasonic scanner, which makes the phone less frustrating when you want to unlock it. They all have horrible pulse width modulation. I'm shooting this video with a shutter speed of 1 to 6400 of a second. As you can see, the screen is refreshing every now and then, which can cause eye strain for people who are PWM sensitive. When it comes to performance, the Pixel 9 and Pixel 9a both have Google Tensor G4, and the Pixel 8 has the Tensor G3. That said, there is a negligible performance difference between the two. I ran a few tests to check this. For the first test, I ran Geekbench, and here the Pixel 9a and Pixel 9 achieved better single-core and multi-core performance compared to the Pixel 8, but the difference was negligible. Next, I tested the graphics performance, especially for gaming, using 3D Mark. Here again, they all received very similar scores. There is almost no real performance difference among the three phones, and all ran at the average of 15.5 frames per second. For the third test, I ran AnTuTu, which measures several components including CPU, GPU, and memory. In this test, the Pixel 9a got the best score, followed by the Pixel 9 and then the Pixel 8. However, as with previous tests, the difference isn't meaningful, and you're unlikely to notice it in real life. They all reach similar temperatures of around 38 degrees Celsius, which is about 100 degrees Fahrenheit. I then decided to go and take some pictures and videos. When it comes to camera settings, the Pixel 9a lacks the action pan mode in photo settings, which allows you to take dramatic shots of moving subjects. In video settings, the Pixel 9a is missing two features, macro mode and HDR video recording. Neither of these is a deal breaker for me personally, since I don't use them, but they might be important to you. Regarding the main sensor, the Pixel 9a's sensor size is significantly smaller than those of the Pixel 8 and Pixel 9. This means less light reaches the camera. That said, thanks to computational photography, videography, and denoising, the Pixel 9a still produces decent video quality. For pictures, the smallest sensor size of the Pixel 9a means that you get less depth of field, or bokeh as it is commonly called, compared to the Pixel 9 and Pixel 8. This year, the Pixel 9 features an improved ultra-wide camera with a lower f-stop and a larger sensor. This means the Pixel 9 produces the best ultra-wide images, followed by the Pixel 8 and then the Pixel 9a. However, similar to what we saw in the previous video, it is not immediately obvious at first glance that the Pixel 9a's quality doesn't match the other two. Especially with the still images, these ones are typically so good at processing that you would barely notice the differences, even under these cloudy, low-light conditions. Now, let's check the selfie camera and microphone quality. Now we are testing the microphone and also the selfie camera on the Pixel 9. Now we are checking the Pixel 9a. One thing that I noticed is that on the selfie camera, you cannot shoot in 60 frames per second on the Pixel 9a, whereas on the Pixel 9 and also Pixel 8, you can basically shoot in 30 frames per second or 60 frames per second. Now we are on the Pixel 8, you are checking the microphone and also the sound quality. I'm sorry, but it was raining outside, so I could not continue the camera comparison. I will do another comparison later tomorrow. I then decided to test the battery life and thermals of the phones under different conditions. I disconnected Wi-Fi and connected all phones to the same 5G network while setting them to the same brightness using a lux meter. The Pixel 9a has the largest battery capacity at 5100 mAh, the Pixel 9 has 4700 mAh, and the Pixel 8 has around 4600 mAh. Right now, all phones have a smaller battery percentage, and I ran a YouTube live stream. Generally speaking, YouTube doesn't consume a lot of battery. I ran this test for about an hour, and to my surprise, the Pixel 9 reached 39 degrees Celsius, which is 102 degrees Fahrenheit, which is extremely high for just streaming YouTube. The Pixel 9a and Pixel 8 both reached 35 degrees Celsius, which is 95 degrees Fahrenheit, which is also considered warm. Currently, the Pixel 9 is ahead, followed by the Pixel 9a and then the Pixel 8. For the next test, I captured video at 30 frames per second using the selfie camera. I ran this test for around 20 minutes before the Pixel 9 and Pixel 8 both surpassed 40 degrees Celsius, which is 105 degrees Fahrenheit. The Pixel 9a remained a couple of degrees cooler than the other two. At this point, the Pixel 9 and Pixel 9a both had 77% battery remaining, while the Pixel 8 had 71% left. I then played the WebGL aquarium test, which is especially graphic heavy since all the fish are rendered individually in Google Chrome. By the end of the test, all phones had similar temperatures, with the Pixel 9 being a degree cooler. It is worth noting that the Pixel 8 was experiencing frame drops, which is probably why it didn't got as hot this time. At this point, the Pixel 9 and 9a were both at 66% battery, while the Pixel 8 was at 60%. For the next test, I connected all three phones to each other via Google Meet for a group call. This is one of the heaviest tests in terms of thermals and battery life. By the end of the test, the Pixel 8 reached over 50 degrees Celsius, which is quite alarming. That's 122 degrees Fahrenheit. To simulate extended gaming, I ran the wildlife extreme stress test, which puts the phone through 20 heavy loops. It is almost midnight now, and the Pixel 9 is leading by just 1%, while the Pixel 8 is 12% behind the Pixel 9a. I then put all three phones on standby over 5G, went to sleep, and when I woke up, the Pixel 9 had 25% battery left, the Pixel 9a had 29%, and the Pixel 8 had 16%. Finally, I ran YouTube and Google Meet simultaneously to drain the batteries to zero. The results were as expected. The Pixel 8 tends to get hot frequently, and that matches my personal experience using this phone. Generally speaking, I never had good thermal performance with it. The Pixel 9 and 9a handled the load better and had noticeably fewer heating issues. For example, the first phone to cross 40 degrees was the Pixel 8, followed the Pixel 9, and then the Pixel 9a. It was also interesting to see that the Pixel 9a was actually cooler than the Pixel 9 most of the time. Also, it is not surprising that the Pixel 9a is winning the battery battle since it has the largest battery among the three phones. The first phone to die was the Pixel 8, which left the chat at 4 hours and 34 minutes. Both the Pixel 9 and Pixel 9a continued the strong, and the Pixel 9 specifically didn't give up that last 1% easily. The Pixel 9 finally left the chat at 5 hours and 11 minutes. That's over half an hour more screen on time compared to the Pixel 8. The Pixel 9a stayed comfortably ahead of the other two phones throughout the whole test, and finally left the chat at 5 hours and 24 minutes, around 30 minutes more than the Pixel 9. The Pixel 9 is probably the safest choice here. Both of its cameras have large sensor that can capture great photos, even in low light conditions. It also feels more premium overall, but the downside is the higher price and heavier weight. The Pixel 9a is a phone I'd recommend, especially if you can find a good deal on it. It offers the same performance as the Pixel 9, but the camera sensors are smaller, so you won't get the same results in low light. Still, it's cheaper, lighter, and has a slightly better battery life. The Pixel 8 is a complicated story. Yes, it is more of a flagship, especially on the camera side, but the phone hits up with every Android version I've tested, including Android 15 and 16 Beta 4. I also experienced weird connection issues, and friends who used it as their main phone confirmed the same problems. Personally, I would pick the Pixel 9a over the Pixel 8. If you enjoyed this video, you can watch the comparison of the Pixel versus Galaxy S25 next. Thanks for tuning into Techmo, and I will see you in the next one.